Meet The Lot, native token of Lukki Exchange and the most potential tool for investing this year. Trade now on P2B, B2B and Lukki.io.
For you. And I want to get on with the introductions. My name, by the way, is Jennifer Georgino, and I am an advocate of blockchain in the space. And I am on the Atlanta, I'm actually on the advisory board of Technology Association, the Digital Health Group, and I'm here representing Georgia Blockchain Coalition today. We have a panel that is really versed in issues regulatory and which is very important in the crypto and blockchain space. I've even had people sending me texts. Are they going to keep it? Which, of course, is a good thing, right? So let me get on with the introductions. I've got, to my immediate right, ladies first, is Sasha Hodder. Sasha is an attorney of counsel at DLT Law Group. Maybe this is working. Yeah, okay. I am going to use this. Forgive me. At DLT Law Group, and they are focused on the fintech sector. And next to her, I've got Ajay Jindia, who is partner with Schoenthaler Law Group here in Atlanta that focuses on startups, and he's also general counsel, where I met him, of the Thai Atlanta organization, which is a professional entrepreneur organization, a very cool organization with a lot of entrepreneurs, VCs, and startups and individual investors. Next to him, I've got actually Austin Mills, who is an attorney with Miller Manning & Martin and is in the technology law firm. So to lay the foundation, I wanted to give you just a couple comments that have been in the press lately, as well as just comments in general of concern. So only yesterday, the SEC commissioner stated that in all likelihood, a Bitcoin ETF will be approved. That was kind of big information and new data. Hey, what will the second phase of the SEC's enforcement actions be? And of course, the first phase, we've been through the wild, wild west of 2017 with ICOs, and last year we saw in 2018 was the SEC's first phase of their enforcement, right? Which was huge and painful to some, right? So we're now looking at what they're calling a second phase of enforcement. So we're looking for the panel to give us some information and guidance on what that's looking like. How many different tokens are out there? I was talking to Sasha, and she's like, there's a million, Jennifer. So we're not going to go into them, but certainly advisory about tokenization that's out there. Can I airdrop a security token? This is a question that's come to me a lot as well. So we're going to get into that as well. And capital raising and liquidity issues. Obviously, these are lawyers at firms that are giving advice on investments to customers, clients, to individuals, to entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of value in this panel, and I want to get to them immediately. So Austin, I would love for you to kick it off for us, if you don't mind. After the ICO bubble and with what the SEC was doing last year and the other regulatory bodies, could you take us through the space and where we are now with the rules and guidance that they imparted?
Sure, and I'll try to be quick. I think we can kill the whole
That's
time
okay.
of it, and we shouldn't. But I mean, I think to get to the point, it's, from my perspective, still a bit of a mess, especially the U.S. with respect to securities laws and how that interplays with ICOs and things of that nature. There are paths to make it work, and there's a lot more talk around security tokens now as the one of the new buzz items. But I think there's also still some particular challenges that are unique because ultimately, we know, most people here at this point probably know that the SEC has taken a pretty firm stance against ICOs. Suggested most of them are securities offerings, and that's fine. And securities laws, early stage companies are used to navigating those. But the issue, I think, really is that, traditionally those kind of companies rely on exempt securities and the restrictions that come along with them. So if you're familiar with like Reg D or whatever, and those have liquidity restrictions, they have, accredited investor only type restrictions. And when you're trying to get a token and you're trying to get liquidity in a market, that sort of gets in the way. So what you kind of get left with are either more limited, crowdfunding type issuance options that have, $1 million type caps, or, more costly securities issuances that require potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in advance. Although, be curious if, the other people up here have different ideas of ways to get around it. So I think we still see a lot of projects going offshore. It's still, a difficult environment for token issuers, and there's still, I think, a lot of risk, a lot of unknown, and we kind of still just kind of wait and see for how this all plays out. I mean, I think I'm at least hopeful that at some point we start thinking about different frameworks, because these don't, I think, fit the securities bucket all that well a lot of the time. So,
Jeff, do you have any comment for that? Or Sasha, sorry. Either one of you, go ahead.
Sasha, please.
I was really interested to see Hester Pierce put out she did a speech yesterday where she made, I think for the first time ever, the comment that not all tokens are securities. And I think we kind of knew that the ICO, the sale of the token and the way that the sale is structured is what created the investment contract. But it was very uncertain for people that just wanted to maybe sell one-off or use tokens inside of a network. Were they violating securities laws, even if they weren't doing a giant, ICO to raise millions of dollars? And I think her speech yesterday was leaning towards that direction, saying, there is a difference. She said not all tokens fall within the investment contract model, and it'll be interesting to see how the industry takes it. It's kind of it might be a give an inch, take a mile situation where people read that to mean, oh, maybe we can do an ICO as long as we have a functioning network at the time of the launch. So it'll be, I think, interesting to watch the next couple months of how her speech is interpreted.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So, sorry. So I know it looks like I'm about to set this panel off with 2 microphones, but I've actually just got technical difficulties. So Austin and I are going to share. So, so I just want to take a step back for a second, and for the benefit of folks who may not have understood exactly what you meant, perhaps by phases, which I think is a really good way to put it. That's kind of the way that the industry is viewing things with respect to legal enforcement. What we kind of saw over the course of the last couple of years, well, particularly last year, calendar year 2018, well, 2017, take a further step back, we saw a lot of people rushing into the space for capital raising purposes, ICOs, the Wild West. 2018, the SEC and various state regulators as well start to kind of get their arms around things and bring a lot of different enforcement actions, and kind of what the industry is calling sort of regulate through enforcement. Why? Partially because they saw a lot of what they considered to be risky practices in the marketplace, and partially because running things through the regulatory process, actually getting us a framework in place that people can use, takes a long time, turns out. Congress doesn't do much. That's perhaps a controversial statement, although I think becoming less so as the years go by. And the regulatory agencies, it takes them a long time to do rulemaking, comment processes, come up with a way that people can actually run compliant ICOs and STOs without having to worry about whether the regulators are looking over their shoulder through enforcement actions. So I think one way to try to speed up the process of figuring out how these things are going to work is to bring a lot of enforcement actions, which is what they did in 2018. Now, when I say enforcement actions, I don't mean that they were taking people to court and throwing a bunch of people in jail. They were issuing a lot of cease and desist letters to companies. They were issuing requests, voluntary requests for information. I had a couple of clients in 2018 that ran ICOs, and I basically flat out told them, I said, you're going to attract the attention of the regulators, and they're going to ask you questions. And they did, and they were prepared for that, and that's okay. So now the question becomes, what are we looking at in 2019? For folks who are waiting on that framework, waiting on that rulemaking process, I do think it's going to come. I would not hold your breath. It's a matter of budget. It's a matter of focus. These things take years to put together. So I think we're probably still 2 or 3 years off at best from having an ICO framework in place at the federal level. I do think it's coming, but I do think it's going to take time. So I think what we're going to see in 2019 is more formal guidance come through the no action letter process, come through the FinHub process of request for guidance, probably some more guidance by enforcement, but I don't think we're going to see a regulatory framework for a couple of years.
What kind of trends, just to spin off of that, Austin and Sasha, what kind of trends do you see anticipating coming down the pike in terms of governance or some regulatory?
I think there's a lot of opportunity in the regulated token offerings, like what people can do with Reg D, Reg S, Reg A+, if we ever do get one. That seems to me like until at least we get some kind of formal guidance, it's really the only safe way that I'm comfortable proceeding when someone comes looking to do an ICO. And maybe that will change based on the new comments that we saw from Hester Pierce, but I think it's a clear path. If you do want to issue tokens, you can follow Regulation D and issue them to accredited investors, and you have to lock them up for a year. And it does have quite a it stunts the project compared to something that is issued with, just let the tokens flow. You have to collect the information of who it is buying the tokens and make sure certainly that they are, to be an accredited investor, you need either a net worth of $1 million or income of $200,000 over the last couple years. So it has been criticized that it's limiting the investment opportunity only to the people who are already quite wealthy. But for now, it's a cautious approach from the SEC saying, okay, well, this is the private placement method that works for traditional offerings, so it will work here too. The only real challenge with that, and it's a big challenge, is the liquidity after the year is up. Right now, I think we have T0 that is just getting started as a place that can create an aftermarket for these tokens, but other than that, I think there's not a lot of liquidity we're seeing, but it's certainly likely going to grow over the year.
But Reg D will stay accredited credit even post the year, right? So I mean, how many people are building token networks only meant for accredited investors? I think that's part of the problem.
The opposite of the whole intent of it, right?
Right. I mean, and I think that's why. I think the main reason we saw the huge drop off over the last year has been market and failure to deliver of major projects. But I think the second reason is definitely that it's just not a clean legal path. It's not incredibly costly very early. Because all these other structures that most companies rely on, it's okay for most private securities to be illiquid. It's generally not okay for these tokens to be illiquid, and that makes all the difference, it seems.
One thing we haven't talked about is the states, because there was some report by the Trade Association for State Securities Regulators that says that in August there was over 200 separate investigations going on by the states of ICOs. So. I mean, New York and California, they're going to get into some kind of shit, and they're going to put something out there that's going to, there's going to be they're going to come into the void.
At the state level.
It's very possible, as you made that comment, I remember the comment by the chairman of the SEC a few months ago that said, I have yet to see an ICO that I don't think is a security. So, regulated in some way, I think you're in trouble.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair to the states, it seems to me, and curious if you have a different opinion, that they have actually primarily gone after actual cases of fraud, like BitConnect and things like that, whereas the federal, there's a few instances of fraud, but a lot of that enforcement has just been run-of-the-mill ICOs, teams trying to do the right thing, trying to, do it a different way, and modest raises. I think that's been, the big deterrent.
Well, there's been a significant amount of fraud, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem.
Yeah. And that should be enforced, right? I mean, I don't think anyone, or most people, there's plenty of people that would say we don't need any enforcement for any of this, but I think that we all have a vested interest in that, right? And it's when the securities all sort of get in the way of progress without, they're trying to solve a problem that isn't there that I think, is what we need to work more at the federal level.
And indeed, go ahead.
Well, I'll say just back to your comment about Congress. Congress and the state legislatures are good for two things: doing nothing and overreacting. So exactly, there's going to be, the states are prone to overreact, and then when the states overreact, the federal government comes in, and there tends to be pain before you get to the right place. So hopefully there'll be, if we can control the fraud, and there's more success stories out there, that there'll be a better position for that.
And at the end of the day, the SEC not to defend them at all at an event like this, but is there to protect consumers. Am I right, Jeff? So in terms of the fraud that has been out there with ICOs, at the end of the day, consumers and individual investors do want to know that there's some sort of protection out there backing us from Theranos and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Quite right. That's certainly true. I would say part of the reason you see more, fraud enforcement, perhaps on the state level, is because, that's their citizens. You know what I mean? I often say that, one of the things that regulators want more than anything in life is for their phone not to ring. And they just don't want their phone to ring. They have a lot to do. And when their phone is ringing, it's usually because somebody's angry, and they have to answer to an elected official. And so, the state's attorneys general get a lot of calls about fraud. The SEC takes a broader view of the marketplace in general and what it means for, overall consumer protection. But I do, and so that's absolutely right, but I do want to point one thing out that I always, try to point out in these circumstances. The SEC has, by statute, I say statute, I think that's right, a dual mandate. It's not just to protect consumers, but it's the effective functioning of capital formation markets. So they, in my view, I still believe this, they want this to work. They're going to be a partner in this space, but they've got to protect that first mission first, and make sure that it's done in a way that is that we can do ICOs in a way that protect consumers from fraud. And then beyond that, I believe they're gonna help try to facilitate it being done in a way that actually does, raise capital in a sort of a 21st century manner. So a lot of times we're still trying to move into the 20th century, let alone the 21st, right? So it does have a dual mandate. So the consumer protection is there, but they also want this thing to work, in my view.
Yeah.
And
Let me throw something
can I
up.
add a little on to that? I think one of the things that really challenged the SEC is the fact that this is a different model where you're kind of selling something that may be worth nothing. Like, you don't get any equity in the company, you just get a token. And so I think that confused a lot of people at the beginning of the ICO market. And, we've seen such abysmal returns in that market too. And then all the fraud that it just created a situation where there was so much hype and so little delivered from it that it attracted the regulators. And even the lack of integrity in some of the technology, like the DAO getting hacked at the beginning. If it wasn't like such abundant raises and then undelivered promises, we probably wouldn't be in this situation with the ICO and all the states, putting so much attention on this. And maybe if it was a situation where the tokens gave people equity more than just a token, it would create some kind of incentive, which I think is what people are starting to move towards, more of a model like that now, with people being able to contribute to the success of the network versus just buying a token and then not really knowing what you're getting or who you're getting it from. So
Good point. Good point. What also came up in 2018 was questions or even attacks on the issues of exchanges and what they're doing and regulating them. Do any of you have thoughts or comments on exchanges?
Well, can I just say very quickly on that? And I don't practice in the exchange area. We might have other folks on the panel who do, but I will say this: that is the biggest story. That's the biggest piece of this. Ultimately, is what the regulators are going to do with the exchanges for a lot of the reasons that the folks up here have touched on already. Which is, in the end, if you're issuing a security that doesn't ever have any chance of having liquidity to it, that's a serious problem, right? For investors. And ultimately, investors are not going to be interested in the next issuance if they don't think that there's ever going to be any kind of liquidity event. There can only be a liquidity event if there's some kind of a marketplace or some kind of an exchange for these things after they're issued. So this is the most important issue going forward, is what they're going to do with regulating exchanges. Unfortunately, it's not really my space, but I just sort of know that to be a truism.
Austin, do you have any thoughts on that, or Sasha?
No, I agree with that, and I think the exchange situation is very interesting. We know what they're going to do with centralized exchanges. They're going to regulate them. They're going to license them, and we're going to see big players participate, right? Like ICE here in town with BACT and things like that.
Right.
I think what's more interesting to me is I think that the end game here, and hopefully not in the too distant future, is that there are no centralized exchanges. I think that's kind of the point, in part, and that we managed to do this all in a decentralized way. And I think the SEC's enforcement action against Ether Delta was interesting in that regard. And I'm actually not certain to what extent Ether Delta is fully decentralized, but to the extent they are, I feel like that was a wrong result, because it's, all this is about protecting against intermediary risk. That's why we regulate intermediaries. If we can create decentralized systems that are actually decentralized, there is no intermediary that we need to protect against. We might need to regulate the, certain things around that to make sure that people can trust the technology. But ultimately, I think, that's where things need to head, right? Because the technology allows for that. And when it does head there, the conversation around what do we do with the centralized exchanges becomes less relevant.
Okay.
I just love the irony of the centralized, decentralized system.
It is an irony. It is an irony. Thank you. I want to get on to smart contracts. Obviously, we've got a legal panel, and smart contracts are an important part of the whole blockchain discussion. It's interesting. Last year at Emory, I attended an AI event where all the doctors were very afraid that with AI, the radiologists would be out of business. I've heard people say, well, lawyers are going to be out of business because of smart contracts. Of course, that's not true. What I wanted to ask this panel, though, is there a discussion around, are they going to be binding? And I know there's no case law yet, I'm sure, but are they just the T's and C's of a transaction? Or are they going to can we anticipate they're going to have a binding law effect?
I think they're clearly binding. I'm just looking forward to the first case. Some state court in, Atlanta and some state judge is asked to enforce a smart contract and not knowing what the hell he's looking at, there's going to, it's a big thing for neutrals, for mediators, arbitrators, judges. If this thing really takes off, is to be able to, it's probably a great gig for you guys to be able to translate smart contracts for lawyers, as far as in their pleadings and how
It's
you're
a huge opportunity.
Yeah, because if you look at this, like the language, it's code.
It is.
And I looked at a code that was, I read the sentence and I read what the code was, and I couldn't tell what the hell it was talking about. So I think I think it's clearly enforceable. There's already existing law with the UETA. There's a Uniform Electronic Transactions Act that almost every state has adopted. There's a question about New York and Illinois because they futzed with the Uniform Act, so that might not be good there. But the Federal E-Sign Act, I think as long as it's a voluntary act to sign those contracts, I think they're enforceable.
Any other comments on smart?
Yeah, so I agree with that. If it's going to put lawyers out of business, I better start working on my jump shot. I don't know the backup plan here, but I agree. I do think they're enforceable, just like any other contract. You got to remember, oral contracts are enforceable. So I'm certain that we're going to see more and more of them. I'm also looking forward to the first case. The thing that really interests me in this space, smart contracts and legal enforcement, is, it turns out that human beings actually really like the concept of reversibility. And in many ways, those are baked into our legal system. In certain circumstances where there's a breach of contract, the ability to go to a judge or a jury and have that arbiter order the other person to do something, to unwind a transaction, to return some material good, whatever it is, get an injunction, get equitable relief that isn't just money damages. That's a feature in our legal system. And I don't know what happens in a circumstance where you litigate a contract and the judge says, all right, I want you to reverse this, and then the parties say that's not possible.
That's not possible, right.
I don't know what happens there. I don't know how our legal system handles that.
Well, why isn't it possible just in the non-blockchain world to just, because in a court, it's not like we're actually undoing that original transaction. Someone's just handing over money or something to make up for it, right?
Well, expand on that. How do you see that playing out?
I guess what's the thing they can't force? What's the example of the thing they can't force to be undone? What's the transaction that a court can't require to be reverted, in a sense?
Well, I suppose, I don't want to get over my skis in terms of the technicals, but I suppose what I'm thinking of is a sort of a cryptocurrency transaction, and then it's like, well, wait a minute, this is fraud, reverse it, and it's like, well, what's gone is gone.
Well, yeah, from a payments network perspective, for sure. If you can't find the counterparty, but if you could get that counterparty that wrongfully received it in court, then you got the same. Yeah. So I think. Yeah, so that's part of the disintermediation issue, right? Because if you're creating systems to let people trust each other, but when something goes wrong, it is nice to have that intermediary there, right, as well. I think the other interesting thing about smart contracts that is taking shape is that, and I think the Chamber of Digital Commerce has even sort of publicly come out and asked for states to stop trying to do this. But the states, I think, that were trying to be in a positive way, proactively blockchain friendly, and started amending, their digital signature laws to say that blockchain contracts are legitimate, but then they went and defined blockchain in really awkward and terrible ways that might suggest that, well, what if you have a blockchain that doesn't fit this definition, which is probably most blockchains? Does that not now get the electronic signature protection that we already had from UETA and the equivalent? So I think they've a little bit listened, because I've seen a slowing down of state adoption of these blockchain smart contract enabling legislation. But I think for the moment, we have the laws we need to make that work, and so adding more is not the way to go about it. But.
Go ahead, Sasha.
There's some interesting developments happening in Wyoming, and I think one of the 8 bills that they're trying to move forward is to create a chancery court that would only deal with blockchain-related legal battles. So anyone could technically access that by just writing into your contract, we're going to follow Wyoming law, and then there'd be this one court that gets all this case law history in it as it develops, so that was fun to watch.
Turns into Delaware, basically, right?
I was just going to mention Delaware is putting some corporate documents allowed on the blockchain. So moving on, what about the issues around, and I wanted Sasha to speak to this, digital fine art. This is her bailiwick, and she's going to be speaking, by the way, later in the program on her own in deeper depth on it. But the idea of even partially owning fine art And is it your property? And you get into property law and that sort of thing. Could you just address that briefly and let us know what's going on in that whole creative, which I know others are going to speak to it as well in another track, but the whole creative market around partially owning a piece of art and all of that has been around now for a few years?
A lot of different ones. Like, I think if you're doing partial ownership, it might implicate the securities laws still. And some of the challenges around providence with putting physical art on the blockchain still exist of, there's human error possible. But when you have the digital art that's actually attached to the token, it's a really growing thing where, it's a new way of trading art, and you really can see the history and the ownership, and I think it can work. Fraud in the art market has been a huge challenge over the course of history, and now if you can tokenize it, you can really eliminate that fraudulent aspect. You can know the rarity of the artwork really well, and it was something that these whole, everything's a security comments from the SEC were kind of crippling that. Well, the market wasn't listening to the comments really. Like, it's still growing, and it's a lot's going on in this digital art market. But there's this constant fear of, is this money transmission when you're selling a piece of art, and is it a investment sale or investment contract when you're selling this piece of digital art? So those are some of the questions that I'm going to look at, of what is a consumable good versus which doesn't implicate the securities laws, and then where's the line of what is a investment contract that does implicate the securities laws. And I think is an important question for the whole ecosystem beyond just art. It's like, what's the stuff that's not a security, and then what is? So it's interesting to look at, but until we get formal case law, creating a line in that sand, it's all very much speculation on what will the SEC interpret this to be.
Go ahead, Austin. Did you have a comment on that?
I was going to say, I hope that fails from the efforts of others, part of the Howey test, but I've thought other places in this space failed parts of the Howey test, and the SEC disagree with me. So yeah, I mean, that's interesting. That would not be a good result. But no, I think that's the art, in the digital collectible, and the having digital scarcity for the first time ever through, I know I'm familiar with ERC 721, most commonly, but no, it's an interesting space. And
So how do you secure the asset? Is it the copyright?
Well, it's a token itself, so it's like each one, depending on what blockchain, but you can have them on the counterparty blockchain, or the ERC 721s are fungible tokens. So the token itself is secured by the blockchain.
yeah, but legally it'd be a copyright, and
So the token is the digital art? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Kind of.
or the digital art is tokenized and recorded on the blockchain. I think the idea would be that you were putting the copyright rights into that. You're in a sense assigning them to that token. For
Speaking of rights, that kind of segues us into the issue of not only trademarks, but IP and the protection of intellectual property and patents, that in the startup world is a real important aspect, especially for those of you that are either in a startup now or looking at startups, or an investor, or having an idea, just an idea. And at what point do you look at making something patentable? And is it important? I know that Jeff's firm, and I know that Yuri, one of the other partners in your firm, is going to be speaking later, but I don't think he's speaking on IP really. So if any of you, or if Jeff wants to start with talking about the importance of, as all of you look at a new product or something new, or really dismantling a whole industry or sector of an industry, what do you do around the whole patent and IP protection?
Yeah, not me. I'll pass the buck on that one. My firm does deal in this space. My partner Yuri, is the IP guy, but unfortunately, I don't know anything about how to secure IP in this space. So I'd open it up to others.
I mean, I don't know exactly how you secure it, but I mean, I'll just speak from my clients it's all about monetizing the IP. They're just trying to create value. So I don't have any clients that are out there just trying to do good in the world and for no profit. I don't have a lot of nonprofit clients. So in the profit world, all my investor clients, all the VCs, they want to know that you own the IP. They hate open source. They love it to be proprietary and exclusive.
Speaking of
And so a lot of these things that are out, I mean, and part of the things, I think like a lot of these dApps, these decentralized apps that are being built on open source. And I'll be honest, I haven't looked at it, but if any of those open source platforms have a copyleft, which means that you have to, whatever you build, you have to share. You're not going to get a lot of VCs interested in what you're doing. It's got to be, I have clients that do nothing but focus on acquiring disruptive IP that can disrupt an industry. That's all they care about. And they haven't, and I'll be honest, most of my clients, whenever we've touched blockchain, they've decided against it because they haven't found the exclusivity of IP, the intellectual property they needed to really make it a viable
So if it doesn't have
venture.
if it doesn't have
At least the ones that we've seen. I'm not saying, I'll admit, I see a small piece of this, of transactions that relate to blockchain, but what I've seen, one of the issues that's always kind of broken the deal is that they just didn't find the IP attractive enough. So.
And you know what, if you don't mind, Yuri, I'm going to ask you to speak up since Jeff couldn't comment on it, but I know your firm is very much, and this is Yuri, who is the founding partner of Founders Legal, which is Jeff's firm. But the issue of patents
Excellent question.
And the importance of intellectual property when people in the audience, even students who have a great idea, are like, is it important? Is it something I need to do? I talk to too many people with ideas that don't even think about that sort of protection.
Certainly. It's a very important question. I think you did a very good job addressing the importance of having IP. But an interesting problem presented by the blockchain is with regard to securing that IP. Not in the sense that you can't protect innovation. You could still file for patents, and technology on the blockchain is quite patentable. But the problem I see with patents on the blockchain is the exclusivity, the right to exclude others. And if you have a fully decentralized and distributed system where any node can participate, well, that node's going to have to run some code to be a part of that blockchain. And if ultimately you, as a patent holder, can determine which nodes get to run and which don't, because you have the right to exclude others from using your patented technology, then it seems contradictory. It seems like it's not compatible, the notion of patents in a non-permissioned ledger. So.
And yet, to Ajay's point, investors are only interested oftentimes in what is patentable, to have that value and to make something, know that their investment is going to be worth something at some point. So it is an irony as well. Thank you. Thank you, Yuri. Go ahead, Sasha.
Has anyone seen that speech, The Cathedral and the Bazaar? The cathedral is like the centralized area, or, anyway, it's like the cathedral is all these tokens that are not Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is the bazaar, and it's open, and I think the difference, you can patent everything else, but Bitcoin will remain open.
All right, let's move forward. I would like to have, and I think we're going to be getting close to time, or we're good on time? Are we still good on time? Good, good. Enforcement actions and issues around the dark side. So I've been attending some cybersecurity events, and I'm not sure if the lawyers can speak to how are you advising companies to protect themselves, even startups, with their firewalls or what have you. There's obviously hacking in the area that I come from, which is more blockchain in the healthcare space. It's a huge topic. Yesterday they were talking about how pacemakers and medical devices now within a body, right, are being hacked or can be hacked. And hospital systems are very concerned with that. It's already happening. It's not when. It's not if, it's when. So, and IoT and AI is going to be contributing to all of that. But I wondered, in terms of legal counsel, if you could comment on people looking at the whole issue of cybersecurity attacks and hacking and the dark side, if we can go there. Any comments?
Well, for people building on Ethereum or EOS, there's a company called Hosho that will try and hack your blockchain before you put it out to the public. And I think there's a lot of companies like that. Hosho is just the one that I'm familiar with. But I think it's always a good idea to really hire someone that's a good hacker and see if they can get into it. And I think as the industry moves forward, that might become a kind of a standard requirement. You need either the Hosho seal or some kind of approval saying that this technology is at least, sound enough to meet this standard.
There is a company also, I referred to Michael, that I think he's going to speak, Virag, if he's in the room. It is with a company out of Emory B school actually called Authio, Authio, and they actually audit smart contracts, which is an up-and-coming industry, truly, which for the reason that you're stating. And he'll be speaking, I think, on the Ethereum panel. I wanted to get to KYC and AML. So those issues, and I think you mentioned KYC earlier, know your customer, currency. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice already. Money laundering seemed to come up as something that the consumers in general who had no idea what the technology was were fearful of. And because, rightly so, there were a few instances. So how is that being looked at from DC and the government and any regulation, if there is, around it or governance?
Well, the regulators think it applies. I mean, I read something that, I think there's like a Cayman bank that actually handles, cryptocurrency. And if you want to set up an account there, they're actually asking for copies of passports and utilities. And I mean, they're in the Caymans, for God's sakes. So
It's changing. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think people do. There is an association, whether it's because of Hollywood or whatever, because people think that there is and there is obviously a criminal, use of the black market use of the cryptocurrency. So yeah, I think those few banks that are kind of playing in that space, I think it only makes sense because as far as the regulators are concerned, it applies.
Yeah, that's going to continue to be a huge issue because of exactly what AJ said. As long as the nefarious uses of cryptocurrency exist, and as long as they are as prevalent as they have been in the marketplace, a lot of federal and to some extent state regulators, particularly federal regulators, are going to be very, very interested in this space from an AML KYC standpoint because what they see is potential funding of terrorists. So, you're talking about the Justice Department, the FTC, the SEC, you name it, the entire alphabet soup, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, all of them are going to be looking at AML KYC aspects, and it's going to continue to have tremendous relevance. I just wanted to add on one thing to your previous question too. We're going to continue to see the necessity for and the premiums on cyber liability insurance go up and up and up. We have a ton of clients who, at this point, they don't have any choice in their business model. They have to secure that coverage, and it's changing as the laws change too. One of the things I know that you were interested in talking about to some extent, if we had time, was GDPR and the privacy regulations in California. Exactly, and a lot of folks don't know how to deal with these things yet. I mean, the thing that the legal field likes more than anything else is certainty and repeatability. And we have an open field where people are coming into it and they're going, well, I don't know how the regulators are going to view this. I don't know how my counterparties are going to view this. I don't know who should have the risk for this. Should it be unlimited? Should we cap it somehow? Should you indemnify me? Vice versa, and so forth. And so insurance policies are going to step into a lot of this, and they're going to be expensive because the risks are catastrophic.
I can't imagine. Right.
Pro tip, if you're buying cybersecurity insurance, read the exclusions, read the policy, because you'll be amazed at what little is covered by those policies.
See, so those jobs that are going to be disintermediated, well, now we're having new jobs formed. So thanks for the segue. I was going to ask a question about GDPR and the whole privacy rights and the right to be unknown. If any of you have comments on where that's going in the United States, how it's affecting your clients, large or small, is it a big issue? Is it something that this audience should be aware of?
The feds are watching.
It's a huge issue. I mean, the cost for compliance.
The fines, yeah.
I mean, here's the interesting thing. And when the whole GDPR thing was going on, you know who really loved it? Google, Microsoft, Facebook. They loved it. Why? Because the cost was so high that it forces out all the smaller players.
They can afford to comply.
Yeah, they can afford to throw, $10 million at the problem.
And did you see the stuff with Mr. Bezos with the
I'm wishing,
photo of his
he probably wishes it
genitals?
applied here.
Could one of you explain to the audience, in case there are students and people that might not know exactly what GDPR is?
This young lady's been has her hand up for a long time.
Oh, we're not at the Q&A yet. But
Okay, so hold it. Okay, sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
Go ahead. You want to answer?
I mean, if it's actually anonymized, then if it doesn't fall within the definition of personal data, then it's outside of those regs in general. Yeah, I mean, I think the real problem we have with a lot of cryptocurrencies and blockchains and many that shut down right as that was coming online is that, I mean, even arguably the Bitcoin blockchain has personal data embedded in it. If anybody uses those 80 character messages to send it, right? And then every node in the world running it, has those messages and is sitting on personal information of an EU citizen, right? And how are they going to handle that? I mean, what are they going to do? Are they going to go to every consumer running a node and fine us for GDPR compliance? I don't think so. But I mean, I think the main problem here is that GDPR was written with the assumption that there's an intermediary here that we're regulating. There's a centralized database of personal data that someone's sitting on that can screw it up, and that's not the way blockchains necessarily work. And the GDPR was drafted well before anyone was paying attention to this in a meaningful way. So, I mean, I think the right answer is we just need to reconcile the two because they're incompatible. But yeah, if there's no personal data at all, then you can sort of skirt around it, I guess.
That's a good point. Thanks, Austin. Thank you for your question. We actually are on Q&A. I wanted to ask each panel member, though, to take a second. Since all four of you deal with startups for the most part, or new technology, as you said, AJ, or advising clients that are maybe adopting blockchain in their existing company, what is the number one thing you would either advise never do or the first thing you should do? I can start with Sasha.
It varies between the person coming in.
Just one.
I think it's important who they're working with on their team. I've seen a lot of cases that are, everyone starts as friends and they might not formalize the business relationship, and then money gets involved, and some people feel like some people are, working harder or contributing more than others. So I think it's important to formalize that LLC partnership or however you're structuring the company up front.
Good point. And use your board of advisors if you have one. AJ?
That's a long question. I'm trying to figure out where to.
Sorry.
Well, so I mean, it depends. I mean, like Sasha said a good thing about if you're starting a business. I mean, I tell founders to slow the hell down and write things out and understand, because you're right. There's so many disputes between best buddies that are co-founders, and also when the money comes in, perspectives change dramatically. But I think if you're actually trying to get into the blockchain space or you're investing in the blockchain space, and I'm probably the lone person, I'm still cautious about the industry. I think that the industry needs to mature a lot more. I think the inefficiencies, again, like with data storage and energy consumption, are still major issues. And when I talk to my clients that are investors, those are gating items for them. Mm-hmm. So when somebody solves that problem and finds a way to make it more efficient, I think, and if you're the person out there that can solve that problem, God bless you. You can make a lot of money doing it. But I think I say slow down and just really kind of look through. I think a lot of people are enamored with the actual process of the decentralization, mm-hmm. but they forget about the ends. Like the whole Bitcoin thing, right? They say it's immutable, it can't be hacked. Yet the wallets can get hacked, the exchanges can get hacked, right? So I think
that's not Bitcoin.
It's not, but it's still the process, though. I mean,
it doesn't have to be the process.
Well, okay.
Go ahead.
Don't blame Bitcoin for the counterparties that arose to monetize.
No, I'm just saying that. But does it matter if you're involved in it? If you get hacked,
it means be smart as you're interacting.
Exactly.
Lawyer fight.
You need a lawyer.
Be smart. Be smart.
That's when you need a lawyer. Go ahead, Austin. Your comment.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
This sounds so self-serving that I hate the answer, but in this space, and I'd say this also because I do a lot of work in payments, talk to an attorney earlier than you normally would because it's just regulatory landmines from the gate. And if there might be different paths you can take that from a commercial perspective are equally viable for you, and one is a legal nightmare and the other is way cleaner, and you could figure that out in a 30-minute conversation potentially, because we can't help a lot or nearly as much after the fact, or at least that's not the kind of help that you want. So I think most people up here are probably happy to talk to you for free for a little while, and so I mean we're not always crazy expensive, but this is just such a mess of a space from a regulatory, and it's just it doesn't really matter how you're touching it because there's just whether it's money transmission, securities, the exchange world, the data privacy. Think about that early on.
Totally agree, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing. You ask 4 lawyers, give me 30 seconds of practical advice, and they're like, I really can't do that. It's too hard. But for me, so what I would say is, let me give very quickly practical answer and a legal answer. Practical answer, I caught the tail end of the presentation just before this, and on the practical side, I really agreed with what he said. He got a similar question, and his response was, have a plan. What is the purpose for why you're using blockchain, why you're using cryptocurrency in this project? Do you really need that to solve the problem that you're working on? From the legal side, what I would say, and perhaps dovetailing off of that, is be able to explain it. If you can't explain it, I'm a securities lawyer, so that means if I'm working on capital raising, I'll write documents that are distributed to investors that want to invest in your company. If you can't explain it to me, I can't explain it to them, right? And in some way, I'm not a technical guy, and in some ways, that has served me actually in my practice. But I'm educated and I've seen a lot of different things, and so you ought to be able to explain to me what you're doing so that I can explain it to the investors and the regulators. And if you can't, something's wrong.
Good point. I'm going to take at least one or two questions I think we have time for. Sir, I saw your hand first.
And then the pre-miner then sells it out like an ICO? Yeah, right. I mean, any disagreement? That would be the security. It's just a different origination path. But I do think it is an interesting thought experiment of where you draw that line, right? Does it have to be just Genesis block Bitcoin-esque, or is there some leeway before you've crossed the path, right?
I think we don't know exactly where that line is, but I've been considering if someone's doing a proof of work mineable coin, then that I don't think it is a security. Like if you look at the Raven model, they launched, but they didn't hold anything back. Like they put that all out there.
That was public from Genesis block. Yeah. As was. I mean, technically, I think Bitcoin was too. Just very few people were paying attention. Right?
So I think the difference is if you hold your own coins back when you're mining it. But then some people, like Jason Siebert, an attorney, has argued that even the cost of mining would be you putting up value. So it would create that investment of money because it's an investment of your time and investment of equipment. I don't agree with him on it, but it's been an argument made.
Next question. Good question. Good question.
My bet, I don't know, but my bet is that CryptoKitties assigns the ownership of the CryptoKitty itself on initial sale, and then every subsequent owner, and then so the copyright, and then what if you breed them with someone else's cat? Because you can do that too. I love CryptoKitties. Sorry, that's an interesting question. Yeah, but is it a derivative work, right? That then you need copyright grants from the original copyright holder. Yeah, I imagine they've probably solved that, but there will be inevitably interesting questions of how copyright law interacts with blockchains along the way.
And whose liability then? Who has liability?
Depends on how well the smart contracts written.
There was a question, sir. Yes.
My question is,
Why didn't you register for a patent in the U.S.? Huh? Sorry.
We'll take this offline. Yeah.
Right.
Sir, if you can grab one of the attorneys at the end, I've got to
It sounds
stop.
like you're making a statement, and I think we all kind of generally agree with you on the statement. I just don't. But I honestly, since almost every country now, including the U.S., is like a race to file for patents. If you have any intention of trying to monetize that patent in the U.S., you need to file it, or someone's going to file it before you.
There is protection with just filing, isn't there, initially? At least filing. Anyway, we can have these conversations afterwards. I'm sorry for those who had more questions. Go ahead.
We have, I think, one of the premier experts on money transmission and OFAC, Carol, asking questions.
Hey. Yes, go ahead. If you have a question, I'm taking it. Please. Great. Perfect. Hmm. I believe that. I believe that. Exactly. Hire a lawyer. Hire a lawyer. That's and this is someone who was in-house at Coke and British Telecom, and sometimes you don't need them, but when you need them, especially in your space, you need them. So if you'll please, I knew this was going to be an interesting topic when I invited these folks in an interesting panel, and I think it has been. I've got to close, and won't you please help me thank the panelists that we have?